Hello, and welcome to the Fighting Moose Podcast. I'm your host and narrator, Jason Hendrickson. This is a podcast where I retell stories, some fictional and some historical, that can be enjoyed by people of all ages. Today, we stay with our Norse mythology and read the story Thor's Fishing from the book In the Days of Giants, written by Abby Farwell Brown. Last night, I was asking my son what the next story should be for the podcast. He wanted another Thor story, so I read a list of the stories that I had available, and he picked one. Well, it was not this story. The story he picked was pretty much the same story from the episode released in February of 2019 with the title of How Thor Went to Jotunheim. Anyway, I did find today's story and thought it would be a great substitute since he wanted a Thor story and we both like to fish. If you are fishing for a new book to read, why don't you check out the third volume of Literary Adventures available on Amazon. My wife and coworkers would not appreciate the way I segued into that. They would all be shaking their heads at me. Now, let's turn to today's story. I hope you enjoy. Let's begin.
Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Thor's Fishing. Once upon a time, the Aesir went to take dinner with old Aegir, the king of the ocean. Down under the green waves, they went to the coral palace where Aegir lived with his wife, Queen Ran, and his daughters, the Waves. But Aegir was not expecting so large a party to dinner, and he had not mead enough for them all to drink. I must brew some more mead, he said to himself, but when he came to look for a kettle in which to make the brew, there was none in all the sea large enough for the purpose. At last Aegir did not know what to do, but at last he decided to consult the gods themselves, for he knew how wise and powerful his guests were, and he hoped that they might help him to a kettle. Now when he told the Aesir his trouble, they were much interested, for they were hungry and thirsty and longed for some of Aegir's good mead. "Where can we find a kettle?" they said to one another. "Who has a kettle huge enough to hold mead for all the Aesir?" Then Tyr the brave turned to Thor with a grand idea. "My father, the giant Hymir, has such a kettle," he said. "I have seen it often in his great palace near Elevagar, the river of ice. This famous kettle is a mile deep, and surely that is large enough to brew all the mead we may need." Surely it is large enough," laughed Aegir. "But how are we to get the kettle, my distinguished guests? Who will go to Giantland to fetch the kettle a mile deep?" "That will I," said brave Thor. "I will go to Hymir's dwelling and bring thence the little kettle, if Tyr will go with me to show me the way." So Thor and Tyr set out together for the land of snow and ice, where the giant Hymir lived. They traveled long and they traveled fast, and finally they came to the huge house which had once been Tyr's home, before he went to live with the good folk in Asgard. Well, Tyr knew the way to enter, and it was not long before they found themselves in the hall of Hymir's dwelling, peering about for some sign of the kettle which they had come so far to seek. And sure enough, presently they discovered 8 huge kettles hanging in a row from one of the beams in the ceiling. While the two were wondering which kettle might be the one they sought, there came in Tyr's grandmother, and a terrible grandmother she was. No wonder that Tyr had run away from home when he was very little, for this dreadful creature was a giantess with 900 heads, each more ugly than the others, and her temper was as bad as were her looks. She began to roar and bellow, and no one knows what this evil old person would have done to her grandson and his friend had not there come into the hall at this moment another woman, fair and sweet, and glittering with golden ornaments. This was Tyr's good mother, who loved him dearly, and who had mourned his absence during long years. With a cry of joy, she threw herself upon her son's neck, bidding him welcome 40 times over. She welcomed Thor also, when she found out who he was, but she sent away the wicked old grandmother, that she might not hear, for Thor's name was not dear to the race of giants, to so many of whom he had brought dole and death. "Why have you come, dear son, after so many years?" she cried. "I know that some great undertaking calls you and this noble fellow to your father's hall. Danger and death wait here for such as you and he, and only some quest with glory for its reward could have brought you to such risks. Tell me your secret, Tyr, and I will not betray it." Then they told her how that they had come to carry away the giant kettle, and Tyr's mother promised that she would help them all she could. But she warned them that it would be dangerous indeed, for that Hamir had been in a terrible temper for many days, and that the very sight of a stranger made him wild with rage. Hastily she gave them meat and drink, for they were nearly famished after the long journey, and then she looked around to see where she should hide them against Hamir's return, who was now away at the hunt. "Aha!" she cried, "the very thing! You shall hide in the great kettle itself, and if you escape Hamir's terrible eye, it may hap that you will find a way to make off with your hiding place, which is what you want." So the kind creature helped them to climb into the great kettle, where it hung from one of the rafters in a row with 7 others, but this one was the biggest and the strongest of them all. Hardly had they snuggled down out of sight when Tyr's mother began to tremble. "Hist!" she cried. "I hear him coming. Keep as still as ever you can, O Tyr and Thor." The floor also began to tremble, and the 8 kettles to clatter against one another as Hamir's giant footsteps approached the house. Outside, they could hear the icebergs shaking with a sound like thunder. Indeed, the whole earth quivered as if with fear when the terrible giant Hamir strode home from the hunt. He came into the hall, puffing and blowing, and immediately the air of the room grew chilly, for his beard was hung with icicles, and his face was frosted hard, while his breath was a winter wind, a freezing blast. "Ho, wife!" he growled. "What news, what news? For I see by the footprints in the snow outside that you have had visitors today." Then indeed the poor woman trembled, but she tried not to look frightened as she answered, "Yes, you have a guest, O Hamir, the guest whom you have long wished to see. Your son Tyr has returned to visit his father's hall." "Humph!" growled Hamir, with a terrible frown. "Whom has he brought here with him, the rascal? There are prints of 2 persons' feet in the snow. Come, wife, tell me all, for I shall soon find out the truth, whether or no." "He has brought a friend of his, a dear friend, O Hamir," faltered the mother. "Surely our son's friends are welcome when he brings them to this our home after so long an absence." But Hamir howled with rage at the word friend. "Where are they hidden?" he cried. "Friend indeed! It is one of those bloody fellows from Asgard, I know, one of those giant killers whom my good mother taught me to hate with all my might. Let me get at him. Tell me instantly where he is hidden, or I will pull down the hall about your ears." Now when the wicked old giant spoke like this, his wife knew that he must be obeyed. Still, she tried to put off the fateful moment of the discovery. "They are standing over there behind that pillar," she said. Instantly Hamir glared at the pillar towards which she pointed, and at his frosty glance, snick-snack! The marble pillar cracked in 2, and down crashed the great roof beam which held the 8 kettles. Smash went the kettles, and there lay shivered into little pieces at Hamir's feet all except one, the largest of them all, and that was the kettle in which Thor and Tyr lay hidden, scarcely daring to breathe lest the giant should guess where they were. Tyr's mother screamed when she saw the big kettle fall with the others, but when she found that this one, alone of them all, lay on its side unbroken because it was so tough and strong, she held her breath to see what would happen next. And what happened was this. Out stepped Thor and Tyr, and making low blows to Hamir, they stood side by side, smiling and looking as unconcerned as if they really enjoyed all this hubbub. And I dare say that they did indeed, being Tyr the bold and Thor the thunderer, who had been in Giantland many times ere this. Hamir gave scarcely a glance at his son, but he eyed Thor with a frown of hatred and suspicion, for he knew that this was one of Father Odin's brave family, though he could not tell which one. However, he thought best to be civil, now that Thor was actually before him. So with gruff politeness he invited the two guests to supper. Now Thor was a valiant fellow at the table as well as in war, as you remember, and at sight of the good things on the board his eyes sparkled. 3 roast oxen there were upon the giant's table, and Thor fell to with a will and finished 2 of them himself. You should have seen the giant stare. "Truly, friend, you have a goodly appetite," he said. "You have eaten all the meat that I have in my larder, and if you dine with us tomorrow, I must insist that you catch your own dinner of fish. I cannot undertake to provide food for such an appetite." Now this was not hospitable of Hamir, but Thor did not mind. "I like well the fish, good Hamir," he laughed, "and when you fare forth with your boat in the morning, I will go with you and see what I can find for my dinner at the bottom of the sea." When the morning came, the giant made ready for the fishing, and Thor rose early to go with him. "Ho, Hamir!" exclaimed Thor, "have you bait enough for us both?" Hamir answered gruffly, "You must dig your own bait when you go fishing with me. I have no time to waste on you, sirrah." Then Thor looked about to see what he could use for bait, and presently he spied a herd of Hamir's oxen feeding in the meadow. "Aha! Just the thing!" he cried, and seized the hugest ox of all. He trotted down to the shore with it under his arm as easily as you would carry a handful of clams for bait. When Hamir saw this, he was very angry. He pushed the boat off from shore and began to row away as fast as he could, so that Thor might not have a chance to come aboard. But Thor made one long step and planted himself snugly in the stern of the boat. "No, no, brother Hamir," he said, laughing. "You invited me to go fishing, and a fishing I will go, for I have my bait, and my hope is high that great luck I shall see this day." So he took an oar and rowed mightily in the stern, while Hamir the giant rowed mightily at the prow. And no one ever saw a boat skip over the water so fast as this one did on the day when these 2 big fellows went fishing together. Far and fast they rowed until they came to a spot where Hamir cried, "Hold! Let us anchor here and fish. This is the place where I have my best fortune." "And what sort of little fish do you catch here, O Hamir?" asked Thor. "Whales!" answered the giant proudly. "I fish for nothing smaller than whales." "Pooh!" cried Thor. "Who would fish for such small fry?" "Whales indeed! Let us row out farther, where we can find something really worth catching," and he began to pull even faster than before. "Stop! Stop!" roared the giant. "You do not know what you are doing. These are the haunts of the dreadful Midgard serpent, and it is not safe to fish in these waters." "Oh, the Midgard serpent!" said Thor, delighted. "That is the very fish I am after. Let us drop in our lines here." Thor baited his great hook with the whole head of the ox which he had brought, and cast his line, big round as a man's arm, over the side of the boat. Hamir also cast his line, for he did not wish Thor to think him a coward, but his hand trembled as he waited for a bite, and he glanced down into the blue depths with eyes rounded as big as dinner plates through fear of the horrible creature who lived down below those waves. "Look, you have a bite!" cried Thor, so suddenly that Hamir started and nearly tumbled out of the boat. Hand over hand he pulled in his line, and lo, he had caught 2 whales, 2 great flopping whales, on his one hook. That was a catch indeed. Hamir smiled proudly, forgetting his fear as he said, "How is that, my friend? Let us see you beat this catch in your morning's fishing." Lo, just at that moment, Thor also had a bite. Such a bite! The boat rocked to and fro, and seemed ready to capsize every minute. Then the waves began to roll high, and to be lashed into foam for yards and yards about the boat, as if some huge creature were struggling hard below the water. "I have him!" shouted Thor. "I have the old serpent, the brother of the Fenris wolf. Pull, pull, monster! But you shall not escape me now!" Sure enough, the Midgard serpent had Thor's hook fixed in his jaw, and struggle as he might, there was no freeing himself from the line, for the harder he pulled, the stronger grew Thor. In his Aesir might, Thor waxed so huge and so forceful that his legs went straight through the bottom of the boat, and his feet stood on the bottom